On an unusually quiet Monday morning, the central square of Ashford was filled with people rushing to work, students hurrying toward school, and street musicians hoping to earn a few coins before noon. Nothing about the day suggested it would be remembered for generations. Then a man appeared without warning near the old clock tower. No one saw him arrive. He was simply there, standing calmly in a plain gray coat that looked strangely unfamiliar, as though it had been designed for a fashion that had not yet existed. His hair was neatly cut, his expression was peaceful, and his eyes carried the confidence of someone who had already watched every moment unfold. He smiled politely at the growing crowd and said, "Good morning. My name is Kevin. I have come from the year 2089. A few people laughed, assuming he was performing a publicity stunt or filming a hidden camera show. Others ignored him entirely. Kevin seemed unsurprised by their reactions. He folded his hands behind his back and continued speaking in a calm voice. "You do not have to believe me today. Belief is unnecessary. Time will introduce us properly." A local journalist named Selena happened to be passing through the square with her camera. She sensed that the unusual stranger might at least provide an entertaining interview. She approached him and asked the obvious question. "If you really came from the future, can you prove it?" Kevin nodded without hesitation. "At exactly 11:17 this morning, every digital billboard in this city will display the same sentence for 12 seconds because of a software synchronization error that has not yet been discovered. The sentence will read, 'System reset complete.' Engineers will spend hours searching for a non-existent cyber attack." Several people nearby chuckled. One man checked his watch and whispered that it was still more than an hour away. Selena decided to keep recording anyway. Kevin continued. "At 1:43 this afternoon, a white pigeon with one gray feather on its left wing will land on the bronze statue behind you. Hundreds of people will photograph it because it will remain perfectly still for almost 10 minutes. By tomorrow those pictures will spread across the internet with invented stories attached to them." The crowd began exchanging amused looks. His predictions sounded oddly specific, too detailed to be ordinary guesses. Before anyone could interrupt, Kevin added one final statement. "Tonight, shortly after sunset, a child named Oliver will find a wallet beneath the Eastern Bridge. He will return it to its owner, and that simple decision will quietly change the future in ways no one present can imagine." Selena lowered her microphone for a moment, unsure whether she was interviewing an eccentric storyteller or witnessing the beginning of something extraordinary. Kevin thanked everyone for listening and sat peacefully on a nearby bench, saying nothing more. Around him, conversations resumed, skeptical smiles returned, and life continued as usual. Yet almost everyone who had heard him found themselves glancing at their watches, wondering whether 11:17 would arrive exactly as the mysterious stranger had promised. The square slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but the mysterious visitor remained the center of quiet conversations throughout the morning. Some people laughed about him while walking to work, others searched the internet for similar stories, and a few stayed nearby simply because curiosity was stronger than skepticism. Selena decided not to leave. She positioned her camera where both Kevin and the large digital billboards could be seen at the same time. Kevin appeared completely relaxed. He watched birds circle above the rooftops and occasionally smiled at strangers who looked at him with doubtful expressions. He never tried to persuade anyone that he was telling the truth. Instead, he behaved like someone patiently waiting for an appointment that could not be missed. As the hands of the old clock approached 11:17, several people in the square instinctively stopped what they were doing. Some checked their phones while others stared at the enormous advertising screens that covered nearby buildings. A businessman joked that nothing would happen except another commercial. A student counted the final seconds aloud. Then, exactly at 11:17, every digital billboard suddenly turned black. The advertisements disappeared without warning. For a brief moment the entire square became strangely silent. 1 second later, every screen displayed the exact same words in bright white letters. System reset complete. Nobody spoke. The message remained visible for 12 long seconds before every billboard returned to normal advertising as if nothing unusual had happened. Gasps spread through the crowd. Selena immediately checked the recording on her camera, convinced she must have imagined it. She had not. The prediction had happened exactly as Kevin described it. Within minutes maintenance workers arrived, confused and carrying laptops. News reporters began interviewing engineers who repeatedly insisted that they had no explanation for the synchronized event. Rumors about hacking spread rapidly across social media, while experts assured the public that no evidence of an attack had been found. Kevin simply remained seated on the bench, quietly observing the growing excitement. Several people who had laughed earlier now approached him with serious expressions. They demanded to know how he had known about the malfunction. Kevin answered with the same calm voice. Because for me, it is already history. His reply only deepened the mystery. By early afternoon the square was crowded with even more visitors, television crews, and curious residents hoping to witness the second prediction. At exactly 1:43, a white pigeon appeared from above the rooftops. It circled the square once before gently landing on the bronze statue behind Kevin. Someone immediately noticed the single gray feather on its left wing. Phones were raised into the air. Cameras clicked continuously. Just as Kevin had predicted, the bird remained perfectly motionless despite the noise surrounding it. Children pointed excitedly while tourists wondered if it had been trained. Nearly 10 minutes later, the pigeon quietly flew away, leaving behind hundreds of photographs and thousands of stunned witnesses. Selena slowly lowered her camera and looked directly at Kevin. The smile of polite curiosity had disappeared from her face. For the first time, she asked her next question not as a journalist searching for an interesting story, but as someone beginning to believe the impossible. If you truly came from the future, she said softly, what happens next? The excitement in Ashford grew with every passing hour. Television crews broadcast live from the square, newspapers released special online editions, and millions of people watched clips of Kevin's perfectly accurate predictions. Some declared him a genius who had somehow manipulated events. Others insisted he was part of an elaborate scientific experiment. A few even suggested that artificial intelligence had calculated impossible probabilities. Kevin listened to every theory with quiet patience, never arguing and never mocking those who doubted him. As evening approached, Selena sat beside him on the bench and switched off her camera for the first time that day. She no longer wanted an interview for her audience. She wanted honest answers for herself. If you really know the future, she asked, why tell us these small things first? Why not reveal something much bigger? Kevin looked toward the horizon where the sun was slowly descending behind the old buildings. Because people rarely accept extraordinary truths before they have witnessed ordinary ones, he replied. A small prediction that comes true opens the mind more effectively than 1,000 impossible claims. Selina considered his words. They sounded less like a performance and more like a lesson carefully prepared long ago. More people gathered around them, hoping to hear what he would say next. Kevin stood and addressed the growing crowd with the same calm confidence he had shown since arriving. Many of you think the future is fixed like words printed inside a book. It is not. Imagine instead that it is a river. Most of its path is predictable, but small choices create new currents. Every conversation, every decision, every act of kindness changes something farther downstream. A man in the crowd folded his arms. Then how can you know what will happen? Kevin smiled. Because some events are so likely that they remain unchanged through thousands of possible futures. Others exist only because people hear about them and choose differently. Time is more flexible than you imagine. Before anyone could ask another question, Kevin quietly made 3 new predictions. Tomorrow morning, the oldest oak tree in Riverside Park will produce a single white blossom, although it has never done so before. Scientists will spend weeks studying it. Tomorrow afternoon, a forgotten melody played by a violinist in a train station will remind 2 strangers of the same childhood memory, beginning a friendship that lasts for decades. And tomorrow evening, someone watching this broadcast will decide not to cancel a meeting they have been avoiding. That meeting will eventually lead to a discovery that improves thousands of lives. The crowd exchanged uncertain glances. These predictions seemed less dramatic than the first ones, yet somehow even more mysterious because they involved ordinary moments whose importance would not be obvious immediately. As darkness settled over Ashford, people reluctantly began leaving the square. Many promised to return the following day. Selina remained with Kevin a little longer. Just after sunset, police officers received a report from the Eastern Bridge. A young boy named Oliver had found a wallet beneath the railing and returned it to its grateful owner exactly as Kevin had predicted. The news spread through the crowd within minutes. 3 predictions. 3 perfect results. Selina looked at Kevin in silence before finally asking the question that everyone else seemed afraid to speak aloud. If you know so much about tomorrow, she whispered, what do you know about the future of all of us? Kevin looked toward the stars that were beginning to appear above the quiet city and answered with a gentle smile. That depends on whether you are ready to hear it. The next morning, people arrived at the square before sunrise, hoping to find Kevin exactly where they had left him. He was already there, sitting on the same bench with a cup of coffee that no one had seen him buy. News vans surrounded the area, drones hovered above the rooftops, and reporters from different countries prepared for another extraordinary day. Selina noticed that Kevin appeared neither excited nor overwhelmed by the sudden attention. He greeted everyone with the same calm smile, as though fame belonged to someone else. At precisely 8 o'clock, a park gardener called a local radio station with surprising news. The oldest oak tree in Riverside Park had produced a single white blossom unlike any ever seen before. Botanists rushed to examine it, taking photographs and collecting samples. Within an hour, the story was confirmed by several independent experts. Kevin's first prediction of the day had come true once again. The atmosphere in the square changed completely. People no longer came to challenge him. They came to listen. By the afternoon, another report spread across the city. A violinist playing at the central train station had chosen an old melody that had not been performed there for years. Two strangers stopped walking at exactly the same moment. Both later explained that the tune reminded them of the same childhood festival they had attended decades earlier. They started talking while waiting for their trains, exchanged phone numbers, and spent the rest of the afternoon sharing forgotten memories. Selena quietly remembered Kevin's words about small moments creating new currents in the river of time. Perhaps the future was not built only by great inventions or historic speeches. Perhaps it was shaped just as much by unexpected conversations between ordinary people. As evening approached, Kevin finally agreed to answer questions from the growing crowd. A teacher asked whether humanity would ever eliminate poverty. Kevin answered, "Not completely, but people will learn that knowledge is the most valuable form of wealth, and sharing it will solve problems that money alone never could." A young engineer asked whether machines would replace human creativity. Kevin smiled gently. "Machines will become remarkable partners, but imagination will remain uniquely human because it is born not only from logic, but from experience, hope, and curiosity." An elderly woman asked the question that made everyone fall silent. "Does the future become better?" Kevin looked around the square before replying. "Yes, but not automatically. Every generation believes someone else will improve tomorrow. The future becomes brighter only when ordinary people decide that kindness is practical, honesty is valuable, and learning never ends." His answer was met not with applause but with thoughtful silence. Many expected dramatic stories about flying cities or impossible technology. Instead, he spoke about choices, character, and responsibility. Just before sunset, Selena received a message from a scientist she knew at the local university. The meeting that someone had almost cancelled the previous evening had indeed taken place. During a casual discussion, an unexpected idea had emerged that researchers believed could significantly improve clean energy storage. The project was only beginning, yet the timing matched Kevin's prediction perfectly. Selena looked at the message, then slowly raised her eyes toward the mysterious traveler. For days earlier she would have dismissed such stories as coincidence. Now coincidence seemed far less believable than the impossible explanation standing quietly before her. Kevin looked toward the western sky, where the first evening stars were becoming visible, and said in a voice that only Selena could hear, "The predictions were never the important part. They were only the invitation. The real reason I came is about to begin." Selena felt a quiet chill despite the warm evening air. Kevin's words echoed in her mind long after he had spoken them. The predictions had captured the world's attention, but now he was suggesting that they had only been a way to earn humanity's trust. The square gradually became quieter as reporters packed away their equipment and visitors returned home with stories that few people would have believed only days earlier. Selena remained behind. She knew that if Kevin truly had another purpose, she wanted to hear it before anyone else. Kevin stood from the bench and slowly walked toward the old clock tower. Selena followed him without speaking. After a few moments he stopped and looked at the ancient stone building. "This tower has watched generations come and go," he said. "People think history is made by kings, presidents, and inventors. They forget that history is also shaped by teachers who inspire one student, neighbors who help each other, and strangers who choose honesty instead of convenience. Selina finally asked the question she had been holding back. If your mission isn't to amaze us with predictions, why did you travel here? Kevin looked directly at her. Because this year is the beginning of a chain of decisions. Most people will never notice it happening, but historians in my time study this period more than almost any other. Humanity stands at a crossroads. One path leads to cooperation unlike anything your generation has imagined. The other leads to decades of unnecessary delays, fear, and missed opportunities. Neither future is inevitable. Selina frowned. Can you tell us which choices we should make? Kevin slowly shook his head. No. If I simply hand you every answer, your future will become an imitation instead of an achievement. Every generation deserves to solve its own problems. Wisdom cannot be delivered like a package. It must be discovered. The following morning thousands of people filled the square once again, expecting another series of spectacular predictions. Instead, Kevin surprised everyone. Today, he announced, I will make only one prediction. Before midnight, someone in this city will perform an act of kindness without expecting recognition. That single decision will eventually influence more lives than any headline you have read about me. The crowd looked disappointed. Many had hoped for another impossible event that would dominate international news. A few reporters even complained that the statement was too ordinary to verify. Kevin merely smiled. The future rarely changes because of famous moments. It changes because ordinary people quietly decide to become better than they were yesterday. Throughout the day, people searched for the mysterious act of kindness. Social media filled with stories of neighbors helping neighbors, volunteers cleaning parks, and strangers paying for one another's meals. Nobody knew which event Kevin had meant. Shortly before midnight, however, an exhausted nurse finished her shift at the local hospital and noticed an elderly man sitting alone in the waiting area. Instead of rushing home, she spent an hour comforting him until his family arrived. No cameras recorded the moment. No newspaper reported it. Kevin simply nodded when Selina told him the story the next morning. Yes, he said softly. That was the one. Selina looked puzzled. How can such a small moment matter so much? Kevin gazed toward the rising sun. Because the elderly man's granddaughter will remember the compassion shown to her grandfather. Years from now she will choose medicine instead of another career. Her research will save countless lives. Every great future begins with someone believing that a small act is still worth doing. Selina remained silent, realizing that perhaps the greatest events in history were often invisible when they first began. And as the city awakened once again, Kevin quietly added, "Tomorrow, I will reveal the only prediction I almost decided not to share." News of Kevin's announcement spread around the world before sunrise. Every major television network interrupted its regular programming, newspapers published special editions, and millions of people gathered online to watch the mysterious traveler who claimed he had hesitated to reveal one final prediction. By mid-morning, the square was more crowded than it had ever been. Families stood beside scientists, students waited next to government officials, and visitors from distant countries filled every nearby street. Yet despite the enormous audience, Kevin remained calm. He greeted people with a friendly smile and patiently waited until the old clock tower struck 10. When the final bell faded into silence, he stepped forward. "Many of you believe I am about to describe a disaster," he began. "You expect me to warn you about an asteroid, a disease, or the collapse of civilization. That is not why I hesitated." The crowd listened without making a sound. "The prediction I almost kept secret concerns something far more difficult. It concerns hope." Selina noticed that even the reporters had lowered their microphones. Nobody wanted to interrupt him. Kevin continued. "Exactly 1 year from today, people from every continent will participate in the largest voluntary day of cooperation in human history. Millions of strangers will work together without being ordered, paid, or forced. They will clean rivers, plant forests, teach children, repair homes, and help communities they have never visited before. Historians in my time will remember that day as the beginning of a new era of global trust." Murmurs spread through the audience. Some smiled with excitement, while others looked confused. The prediction sounded wonderful, yet impossible. A journalist raised his hand. "If such an extraordinary event is going to happen, why would you hesitate to tell us?" Kevin answered immediately. "Because once people hear about a hopeful future, they often assume it will happen automatically. They become spectators instead of participants. The future survives only if enough people choose to create it." The square fell silent again. Kevin looked across the sea of faces before speaking once more. "I did not travel through time to guarantee tomorrow. I came to remind you that tomorrow is your responsibility." Selina understood his concern. If everyone believed that history had already been written, they might stop writing it themselves. The prediction was not a promise. It was an invitation. During the afternoon, conversations filled cafes, schools, offices, and homes across the city. Instead of debating whether Kevin was truly from the future, people began discussing how they could improve their own communities. Volunteers organized neighborhood projects. Teachers planned environmental lessons. Local businesses offered supplies for charity events. None of these actions had been requested by Kevin. They simply appeared, as though his words had awakened something that had always existed beneath the surface. That evening Selina met Kevin once more beneath the old clock tower. "Do you think your visit has already changed history?" she asked. Kevin watched children laughing as they crossed the square with their parents. "History changes every minute," he replied. "The question is not whether I changed it. The question is whether people will continue changing it after I am gone." Selina looked at him with surprise. "After you are gone?" Kevin nodded slowly. "My time here is shorter than anyone realizes. I have only a few days left before I must return to where I belong." The words settled over the quiet square like the first stars appearing in the evening sky. For the first time since Kevin had arrived, Selina realized that the mysterious man from the future would not remain forever, and she wondered whether the world had learned enough before it was time to say goodbye. Kevin's announcement changed the atmosphere of Ashford once again. Until that moment, most people had unconsciously assumed that he would remain in the city for as long as they needed him. The thought that he would soon disappear made every conversation feel more valuable. The square was no longer filled with people demanding impossible predictions. Instead, Visitors came carrying notebooks, asking thoughtful questions about education, science, creativity, and the future of everyday life. Kevin answered each person with remarkable patience. He rarely gave direct solutions. Instead, he asked questions that encouraged people to discover their own answers. A university student asked which career would become the most important in the future. Kevin replied, "The future belongs to those who can keep learning. Your first profession will not define your entire life. Curiosity will become more valuable than certainty." A school principal asked how children should be prepared for tomorrow. Kevin smiled and said, "Teach them how to think, not only what to remember. Information changes quickly. The ability to ask good questions lasts much longer." An entrepreneur asked which invention would become the greatest success over the next 50 years. Kevin looked around the crowded square before answering. The inventions that matter most will not simply make life easier. They will help people understand one another better. Selena noticed something unusual. During the previous days, people had listened to Kevin because they wanted to know the future. Now they listened because they wanted to become worthy of it. The change was subtle but unmistakable. Conversations throughout the city became more hopeful. Neighbors introduced themselves after years of living on the same street. Libraries reported more visitors than usual. Volunteer organizations welcomed new members every day. Even schools organized discussions about what kind of future students wanted to help create. Kevin watched these developments quietly, never taking credit for them. People already carried these possibilities within themselves. He told Selena, "Sometimes all they need is permission to believe that small actions matter." Late that afternoon, Selena asked a question she had avoided since the beginning. "What is your life like in 2089? Kevin looked toward the sky for several seconds before answering. "It is peaceful. Cities are greener, technology is quieter, and people spend less time competing for attention. We still face challenges, but we learn that progress is measured not only by what we build, but also by how well we care for one another." Selena smiled. "It sounds beautiful." Kevin returned the smile, but there was a trace of sadness in his eyes. "It is beautiful because generations before mine refused to surrender their optimism. Even when it seemed easier to become cynical." As evening approached, the crowd slowly dispersed, leaving only a handful of people in the square. The old clock tower cast a long shadow across the stones where Kevin had first appeared. Selena looked at the place and realized how much had changed in only a few days. A stranger had arrived with impossible claims. Those claims had become undeniable facts. Yet the greatest transformation had not been in the predictions themselves. It had been in the people who had heard them. Just before sunset, Kevin stood beside the bench where his journey had begun. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "I will tell you the story of why I chose this city. This square, and this exact moment in history. When you understand that, everything else will finally make sense." Selena nodded silently, knowing that the answer she had been searching for since the first morning was finally within reach. The following morning, the square was quieter than anyone expected. The excitement had not disappeared, but it had matured into something calmer. People spoke in lower voices, greeted one another like old friends, and waited patiently for Kevin to begin. Selina noticed that even the reporters seemed less interested in dramatic headlines and more interested in understanding the remarkable visitor who had changed the city without asking for power, money, or recognition. When the clock tower struck 9, Kevin stood before the crowd and looked around as though he wanted to remember every face. "Many of you have asked why I came here," he said. "Why this city? Why this square? Why this year?" The answer is simpler than you might imagine. He paused for a moment before continuing. History often remembers the largest events, but the future is usually shaped by places that seem completely ordinary at the time. Ashford was never the biggest city, the richest city, or the most famous city. Yet something happened here that quietly influenced the entire world. The crowd listened in complete silence. Kevin pointed toward the old clock tower. 30 years from now, several people who met in this square will create an international learning network that allows teachers, engineers, artists, doctors, and students from every nation to share knowledge freely. It will begin with a small conversation between people who would never have met if they had not gathered here to hear an impossible story. Selina looked around at the thousands of strangers standing together. She suddenly realized that many of them had already exchanged ideas, formed friendships, and started projects during the past week. Perhaps the future Kevin described had already begun without anyone noticing. A young man stepped forward and asked, "Were we always meant to meet here, or did your visit create this future?" Kevin smiled gently. That question has fascinated scientists for generations. Some believe I fulfilled history exactly as it was always meant to happen. Others believe my journey created a new timeline. I have heard both arguments many times, and I still do not know which one is correct. Laughter spread through the crowd. People had expected certainty from a traveler through time, yet Kevin admitted that even the future contained mysteries. The important thing, he continued, is that uncertainty should never prevent action. You do not need perfect knowledge before choosing kindness, curiosity, or courage. Throughout the afternoon, people organized discussions in every corner of the square. Teachers exchanged lesson ideas with scientists. Musicians performed together although they had met only hours earlier. Local business owners planned scholarships for students they had never met. Selina watched these conversations with quiet amazement. Kevin had not brought futuristic machines or advanced technology. He had simply reminded people that their greatest resource had always been one another. As the sun began to set, Selina walked beside Kevin one last time before the evening crowd arrived. "When you return to your own time," she asked, "will people remember you as a famous traveler?" Kevin laughed softly. "Not at all. In my time, the important story is not about me. It is about all of you. History says that an ordinary community decided that the future was something worth building together." Selina smiled, but another question entered her mind. "Then who remembers your name?" Kevin looked toward the glowing horizon and answered in a quiet voice. "Very few people. That was always the plan. The messenger is temporary. The message is what must remain." Selina felt that his farewell was closer than ever, and she wondered how the city would feel when the mysterious man from the future was no longer standing beneath the old clock tower. Kevin's final evening in Ashford arrived with an unexpected sense of peace. There were no barriers around the square, no loud announcements, and no dramatic countdown. People gathered naturally, carrying picnic baskets, folding chairs, books, musical instruments, and handwritten letters. Children played near the fountain while elderly couples shared stories with students who had traveled across the world just to spend one last day with the mysterious visitor. Selina noticed that the atmosphere no longer resembled a news event. It felt more like a community celebrating something deeply meaningful that words could barely describe. Kevin walked through the crowd, greeting people one by one. He remembered names with remarkable accuracy and asked about conversations they had shared during previous days. A teacher proudly told him that her students had started a science club inspired by his visit. A young entrepreneur explained that he had abandoned a project focused only on profit and had begun designing affordable educational technology instead. A retired engineer smiled as he described volunteering to mentor local students every weekend. Kevin listened to every story with genuine happiness. "You see," he said, "the future is already changing. Not because I predicted it, but because you decided to act." As sunset approached, everyone gathered around the old clock tower for what they believed would be Kevin's final speech. The square became completely silent. Even the birds seemed to pause as the evening light painted the buildings in warm shades of gold. Kevin stepped onto the small stone platform where he had first introduced himself nearly 2 weeks earlier. He looked across the thousands of faces before speaking. "When I arrived, many of you asked me to prove that I came from the future. Today I would like to ask something of you instead. Do not spend your lives trying to predict tomorrow. Spend your lives preparing it. Every conversation can become the beginning of an idea. Every lesson can inspire a discovery. Every act of honesty can create trust that lasts longer than you will ever know." He paused as a gentle breeze moved through the square. People often imagine that history changes through extraordinary heroes. My generation learned something different. The greatest changes begin when ordinary people consistently choose patience over anger, cooperation over pride, and hope over fear. Those decisions rarely appear in history books, yet they quietly shape every generation that follows. Selina felt tears forming in her eyes, not because Kevin sounded sad, but because his words carried the quiet certainty of someone who had already witnessed the future they would help create. A young boy raised his hand and asked the final question of the evening. "Will we ever see you again?" Kevin smiled with unmistakable warmth. "Perhaps not me. But someday another traveler may come, not because the future is in danger, but because every generation has stories worth sharing with the ones who came before." The boy nodded thoughtfully, apparently satisfied with the answer. As darkness settled over the city, musicians began playing gentle melodies, families shared food with strangers, and conversations continued long into the night. No one wanted to leave. No one wanted the remarkable chapter in their lives to end. Just before midnight, Selina stood beside Kevin beneath the clock tower. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Finally, Kevin looked at the old clock and quietly said, "When the first bell rings tomorrow morning, it will be time for me to go home." Selina looked toward the place where he had first appeared and wondered whether the beginning and the ending of his journey would look exactly the same, or whether time had one final surprise waiting for everyone. The first light of morning slowly spread across Ashford as people gathered in complete silence around the old clock tower. No advertisements flashed across the buildings, no reporters shouted into cameras, and no one pushed forward to get a better view. The excitement that had filled the square during Kevin's arrival had been replaced by quiet gratitude. Friends who had met only days earlier stood together as though they had known one another for years. Teachers, scientists, artists, business owners, children, and visitors from every corner of the world waited for the final moment. Selina stood near the bench where Kevin had spent so many peaceful hours answering questions that had changed countless lives. The old clock showed 1 minute before 8. Kevin smiled at the crowd one last time. "Thank you," he said. "Not for believing me, but for believing in yourselves. That has always mattered far more." The first bell of the clock tower echoed across the square. A gentle breeze moved through the trees, carrying fallen leaves across the stones. The second bell followed. Kevin looked up at the sky, closed his eyes for a brief moment, and took a slow breath. The third bell rang, and a soft shimmer of light surrounded him. It was not bright or dramatic. It resembled the gentle reflection of sunlight on calm water. The crowd watched without speaking. As the fourth bell echoed through the morning air, the light slowly faded. Kevin was gone. There was no explosion, no mysterious machine, and no trace except the quiet space where he had been standing only seconds before. Nobody rushed forward. Nobody cried out. Everyone simply stood together, understanding that they had witnessed the end of an extraordinary visit. Selina walked toward the empty place beneath the clock tower. Resting on the stone bench was a small notebook that had not been there a moment earlier. Inside its first page, written in neat handwriting, was a single sentence. "The future is never something you discover. It is something you create." There was no signature. There did not need to be one. Selina smiled as she closed the notebook. During the following months, the city changed in ways that no prediction could fully describe. Schools created new partnerships with communities around the world. Volunteers continued helping neighbors without waiting for special occasions. Scientists who had met in the square launched research projects together. Artists organized festivals celebrating imagination and cooperation. The International Day of Service that Kevin had described became reality exactly 1 year later. Millions of people joined, not because they remembered every prediction, but because they believed that even the smallest act of kindness could become the beginning of something greater. Decades passed. The old clock tower remained standing, welcoming new generations who had heard stories about the mysterious visitor from the future. Some believed every detail of the legend. Others thought it was simply an inspiring tale passed from parents to children. Yet everyone agreed on one thing. The city had changed forever after a quiet stranger appeared one ordinary morning and reminded people that tomorrow was built one decision at a time. Many years later, a young student visiting the square asked Selina, now an elderly woman, whether Kevin had truly come from the future. She looked at the familiar bench, smiled gently, and answered, "I no longer think that is the most important question. The important question is whether we became the future he believed we could be." The student looked around at the peaceful city, the smiling faces, and the people helping one another without expecting anything in return. Then the student smiled as well. Above them, the old clock continued marking the passing hours, while beyond every sunrise another tomorrow quietly waited to be created.